Atenistas, and welcome to this week's episode, the very first episode of Tea Time with Tito Zen. For new listeners of our show today, or those who may be unfamiliar with our podcast, each week we invite students / art enthusiasts of the Ateneo to discuss over tea the latest tea on pieces of art. I am your host, your Tito Zen Borja, and for today's episode, we will be talking about what everyone is talking about around the block, the docufilm Kingmaker 2019 by director Lauren Greenfield. Also together with me for today's show are some terrific art aficionados, Jello, Danny, Jay, and Manny. Say hello everyone to our 5.7 million YouTube live viewers as well as our Apple Music and Spotify listeners. We are now number 1 on the top charts global Philippines. Thank you guys again for coming today, and siguro as an icebreaker na rin, can I ask for everyone, if you were a type or kind of tea, what would you be and why? Let's kick it off with Danny.
Hello, Tito Zen, and hello to our 5.7 million YouTube live viewers. I'm
Tumaas.
Danny, and if I were a kind of tea, I'd be black or green tea because I'm as basic as it can be.
All right, thank you, Danny. How about you, Manny?
Hello, mga kapisan, mga kabongbong. I am your Tito Manny. And if I were a piece of tea, I'd be an iced tea because I'm cool to all of you 203 billion in the comments right
Let's
now.
go. All right, thank you, Manuel. Jello, how about you?
Okay, hi guys, I'm Tito Jello. Welcome to the podcast. If I were to be a tea, very safe like that, probably be ginseng tea with the health benefits and keeps my skin smooth. So yeah,
All right. How about you, Jay?
If I were a type of tea, I would be jasmine tea because I'm sweet, subtle, and your unexpected favorite.
I disagree. Jasmine tea is so bitter. I will never taste jasmine tea again. Anyway, thank you, tea lovers. But for now, please put your teacups on hold and refill them as we prepare ourselves mentally, emotionally, semiotically, and axiologically to dive deeper into the world of the Kingmaker, the life of Imelda Marcos, the good, the bad, and even the downright bizarre. So don't go anywhere, guys. We'll see you right after the short break to thank our sponsors.
With feelings ang kainan when there's nesty for everyone. Parang fiesta. It's fiesta! Kaya ito best of
Welcome back, everyone! So di ko na patatagalin pa, no? Our artwork today in question is one of a subject marred in controversy as old as modern Philippine history itself. A woman, a mother, and one half of a dictatorship that has forever etched their names in our history books, for better or for worse. This is the story of the kingmaker herself, Imelda Marcos. For our viewers there who have not yet watched this movie or are not yet aware, you may also watch this movie freely at the QR code that we'll be providing in your screen or in the link in the description below. Alright, so let's start with the first segment for our invited guests, right? The world behind the art, where we talk about the background and context of the art pieces that we analyze, guys. So first off, what can you say about the painter, or in this case, the movie maker, behind the film or documentary The Kingmaker? Has anyone heard of Lauren Greenfield before?
I think I have heard of this Tita Lauren
Tita
Greenfield, because
Lauren,
she's a Harvard
yeah, I know.
educated photojournalist, talino, no? She's a filmmaker as well and a documentarian that's been making transformative, groundbreaking work for the past 25 years. That's almost twice as long as I've been alive. Quite old na rin. Some of her notable works are Fast Forward, Growing Up in the Shadow of Hollywood, which is a photo monograph capturing the pervasive yet fascinating youth culture in Los Angeles, the documentary Thin, which is a deep dive into the lives of women battling eating disorders, premiered at the Sundance Film Festival, and The Queen of Versailles, which I think is actually very similar to what we are about to discuss today, which is a documentary showcasing a billionaire family's struggles during the financial crisis.
That's very interesting, no? What do you think of those movies, guys? Like, I think there's a common theme, like what Manny said.
about that, I think the movie that we're talking about today, Kingmaker, which was made in 2019, I think that it's sort of a logical extension about the movies that Manny talked about just now. I think that Lauren Greenfield, if you think about it, she really likes talking about and capturing themes of culture, wealth, beauty, and like societal pressures on people and society. So a natural extension of this was we're focusing on the movie that we're talking about, wherein she tries to examine the political and social legacy of the Marcoses within the Philippines, framing her film through the individual experience the opulent life of Imelda Marcos and the way that she lives her life as a political agent, but also a part of her family as well. So yeah.
It's interesting that you mentioned the theme of wealth actually, because if you see from the title itself, the Kingmaker, it already connotes some kind of royalty and wealth behind it, right? So what do you guys think the greater context is behind the documentary, and what do you think is the general background of the film, and just also talk about what the context is behind the movie itself. Anyone can start the discussion.
Well, we have to go back to what it actually means. So, a kingmaker is a person who influences the choice of parang powerful people within an organization. So, in essence, what do you call that? It's someone who has the capability to influence and prepare someone for a high position of power. So, in this documentary, that would be Miss Imelda Marcos. She is the political kingmaker for her family. We see that with her as parang being the first lady to the late Victor Ferdinand Marcos, where she reaped both monetary and political benefits. And now we see her as the kingmaker for her son and the namesake of Ferdinand Marcos, Bongbong, and how she was able to parang put her children into positions of power, positions of political power.
So just to add further to the context that Jay already said, so about Imelda being a kingmaker for both Ferdinand Marcos Sr. and Jr., it's worth noting that this film actually came out during the 2019 general elections at a time when her own son, Bongbong Marcos, was gunning for national office for the first time as vice president. So while this effort failed, it gives us more context into Imelda's role in that and the motivations behind their ambitions for power.
That's very interesting, Danny, that you brought up the Philippine elections into this. It was really kind of like very intentional on the part of Lauren to release this film in the midst of an elections, such as in 2019. And I think that perfectly leads us to the second part of our podcast, which is how we educate fellow Athenians into like art app concepts that they can learn from in class, right? So let's talk about the artistic elements naman of the Kingmaker as a film. So, for this first question, for under this category, with respect to like the technical elements of the film, guys, like the editing, the audio, the cinematography, what specific scenes do you think stand out for you, and how can we interpret this in terms of like art app lessons and like art app strategies for analyzing art that we've learned in class?
Personally, scenes that stood out to me were the ones where where she was giving out money. So those scenes usually start out, actually medyo dim nga yung lighting dun eh. Pero they usually start out eye level, where it's focused on Imelda, and then they're parang prefacing the act that she's about to do. Tapos when it comes to the act of giving its money out talaga, the first one, it's in the beginning of the movie. It's the first scene of the movie where she's in her car, in the comfort of her car, and then they open this huge window to about 10, 15 people clamoring for money. She hands out 50 peso bills, and then the accompanying dialogue was, from one of her staff saying na, kapag nakakuha na kayo, umalis na kayo para makakuha naman yung iba. Which I guess goes, and the way she was handing out the money too, she was just handing it out like they were parang pamphlets, flyers, kasi baliwala lang yun sa kanya. Tapos the next instance was in the Heart Center, I'm pretty sure, the one that one of her main projects during martial law. In that she visited sick children, and then she asked one of her staff again for the bag that had the money that she could distribute. She pulled out a few thousand pesos, and then it's zoomed in on her. Parang it was a wide shot, and it zoomed in on her in the act where she was giving children 1,000 pesos, and this time the dialogue was parang 1,000 para sa candy. So I guess it falls in line na rin with her parang her desire to keep up appearances, because if you think about it, what she's really doing by saying by paying for candy rather than their healthcare is that she prioritizes how they feel in the moment rather than parang the long-term health and how it would affect the parang those children afterwards.
It's interesting that you mentioned those visual elements, right? They really tie into the semiotic aspect of the art, of the film being a work of art. It reminds me of some scenes, Ren, that stood out for me, like the fact that they keep showing Imelda in the front of his very grand living room in front of all these paintings. These artistic design choices were made intentionally. And there was also one scene there where I remember they were cleaning the mirror, and it was Imelda just standing in front of the mirror. It really foreshadows a lot of the further elements of the movie that we'll be talking about later on. So, in terms of other aspects on cinematography, do you think there's anything to say about that?
Yeah, I think like a very interesting part of this film is the concept of contradiction. Something I'll discuss in a little more detail later on. But I think this contradiction is seen through the cinematography, through dialectic editing, where it cuts between two scenes that express contradictory emotions. Like for example, how when Imelda would say, "Oh, I had such a happy marriage," and then it cuts a scene of Ferdinand Marcos cheating on her. Or when it shows when Imelda goes, "Oh, this was the golden era of our country," and then it shows the brutal effects of the Marcos regime. And another thing, a little bit more political, is like how Noynoy Aquino, then president, would show up in some scenes mentioning the Marcoses, and then it would cut the scenes of the Marcos family, just showing the juxtaposition between those two very important political families in our country. And I think to bring it back to our lessons in the context of, Alex Guillermo's work, within this semiotic plane, this dialectic editing could definitely signify the deliberate ignorance of the Marcos family to the social realities that surround them as a family and that surround us as a country.
That's a very nice point on dialectic editing. I think we'll hone in on that later, as we move on with this podcast. But other elements of the movie that you guys found interesting?
For me naman, the scene that stood out to me were like the scenes where the filmmaker used like some kind of audio, like particularly classical music. So upon researching, we would actually see that the Kingmaker makes use of a film score written by an English composer named Jocelyn Pook, and around the 23-ish minute mark, so classical music is heard in the background of the scene that shows like the beginning of Bongbong Marcos's campaign for vice presidency, right after Imelda reveals that their family plans to enter the executive government positions in the Philippines. So that's done through Bongbong Marcos, like entering the VP position and then eventually the presidential position. And the film score in this scene has a fast rhythm and it has low notes as well, which is something that we commonly hear in like thriller or horror movies. And it's denoting an eerie or like sinister feeling for the viewers, and it makes us feel uncomfortable, and could find it weird and unpleasant, and it's something that denotes that something unpleasant is to come from the plan of the Marcoses. And I think connecting this to Alex Guillermo's work on reading the image as well, audio plays a key factor in setting the thoughts and emotions that the viewers could think of or feel in support of the scenes displayed visually. And in the examples I cited, the film score sets the ambience of the film, like how classical music could display like grandeur or opulence, which is one of the theme of the documentary.
The power of those sensory elements are really evident throughout the film. I think that's very nice of Alex of Lauren Greenfield to take into consideration how those kinds of elements, the way we look at the scenes, how scenes transition from one another, and how we listen to those scenes affect the message of the artwork itself or the Kingmaker as a movie really is very important. Siguro that transitions me to the next question, right? This highly involves a main subject in the form of Imelda Marcos, but she is no protagonist here. But rather, we see Imelda Marcos narrating her own story, narrating the entire documentary itself. Do you think there's something to say about this kind of design choice or plot choice by Lauren Greenfield to have Imelda Marcos narrate her own documentary? Like, what do you think that says of the social and political context around the movie?
Personally, I think that it was just a bid to parang empathize or no, to rather humanize Imelda in the public eye, and by extension get them like the Marxists back into power. Kasi they built their political strength up through strategic political alignments and propaganda over the years. But no, parang referring to how the Marxists supported who the Marxists have supported in the past, like the Dutertes. But it's also her upkeep of this narrative that martial law was perfect, that the Marcoses are perfect, and they're destined to rule the country. There was no poverty, there was nothing wrong with their rule. I guess it just demonstrates her unwillingness to relent. Yun nga. And she did run for president in 1992. Then we had Ini, the daughter as senator, and most recently, and quite prophetic too, given the title of the film, we had BBM as president. Last night, and it's interesting to see how she seeks to become like a trusted narrator, literally, but she fails spectacularly with her constant contradictions, like inconsistencies within her character, such as that scene that talks about her being like this benevolent, this like loving, this kind, this perfect woman, and then it cuts to her guilt tripping Marcos with parang the tape with him in bed with another woman.
Yeah, it really invites the viewer to form like this dialogic connection with the movie, right? With Imelda Marcos, it feels like very dialogic in terms of the iconic aspects and the contextual elements of the movie. Besides that, what do you think is the intentions behind the choice of the author, the director, Lauren Greenfield, in choosing Imelda Marcos to narrate the movie?
For me, I think like building up what like Manny, Danny, and Jay said earlier about like the particular elements and also the political context of the choice to have Lauren Greenfield, have Imelda Marcos narrate the documentary. I think that beyond what Jay said about like it being strategic for her politically, I think that there was an intentional statement made by Lauren Greenfield herself in the way that she frames Imelda Marcos as sort of unreliable narrator throughout the show, throughout the documentary. Like what Manny said earlier, is like a dialectical approach where it's showcasing sort of like the misinformation that she's peddling and her personally believes, but is actually different in reality, like in the way that people are treated on the ground or like her personal, values as a person, etc. So it sort of showcases the cognitive dissonance that's a core of not just Imelda Marcos, but sort of the Marcos regime that's in power currently within the Philippines. So in a similar way that some documentaries have like Ted Bundy or sort of serial killer, although not to imply that she's a serial killer, but like it's an unreliable narrator that creates the central tension of the documentary itself that highlights the particular intentional aspect of Laura Greenfield to have this as part of her documentary.
That's very nice to think about, Jella. That's very thought-provoking. It's also very surprising to see Imelda Marcos agreeing to this sort of contract in the first place. Like, why would you invite yourself to this documentary that's clearly critical against you? So it also says a lot of what the intentions of Imelda was coming into this movie. Her intentions were very clear. It was to reshape the perspective of the public according to her views, according to her distortions, and she felt like this was an opportunity. But apparently, Lauren Greenfield had other plans. So this perfectly transitions us to the third segment of our discussion, the world in front of the art. What reality does the artist, Lauren Greenfield, intend to show us through the Kingmaker, and what does this kind of painting, world building, what kind of world building does this art in the form of the film paint for us? Anyone who wants to begin this discussion?
I think, like I mentioned earlier, the concept of contradiction is like the very foundation of this film, from the editing, from the music, to the very poster. Like I saw the poster of this film, it's the regal, like royal figure of Imelda Romualdez Marcos within a golden frame, standing in front of an image of an urban poor area. That very contradiction of her and herself, her words and her actions, it's kind of like it really highlights what the reality of this film is. To quote John Berger, as much as this sounds like an Imelda quote, we only see what we look at. The look is an act of choice. I think this was very important in the filmmaking of this. In the filmmaking, where Lauren Greenfield, she didn't explicitly say how we are to depict Imelda Marcos. Like Imelda being able to speak for herself, Imelda like depicting all these things as they are, even if they're the opposite, and her even saying the very famous line, "Perception is real and the truth is not," just shows the very contradictions that make up Imelda Marcos as a person. And some people might see the lens that the film is depicting her as humanizing her, and others may see it as like romanticizing her. And the humanizing aspect is that she is a person, but some people might take the depictions of Imelda in this film as like making up martial law to really be this golden era when it really isn't.
That's true. The question that lingers upon viewers is she a mother or is she a tyrant? I like those like glaring contradictions analysis. In line with that, are there other glaring contradictions that you observed in the movie, guys? Anyone?
For me, a contradiction that I noticed upon watching the movie would be of Imelda contradicting history, like what she or her family thinks they did during the time of martial law and what actually happened. So, in this, we can see that Lauren Greenfield's intention was actually to give a platform to Imelda Marcos and her family to express what their perceptions. But um, and it actually kind of breaks our like perspective of the Marcoses. But in doing so, she juxtaposes like Marcos's own narrative with historical facts, personal accounts, and archival footage, and these create glaring contradictions essential to the reality that Lauren Greenfield wants to paint for the viewer. And this is intended as she prompts viewers to critically analyze and reconcile the stark contrast between Imelda's perceptions and historical reality.
That's so relevant and true, Danny, because I remember some of the scenes in the movie. They were really contradictory. For example, that scene where she was discussing how proud she was of the San Juanico Bridge, how it's essential to her love with her husband. But then it's also like a few minutes into the movie, it's a sign of torture for these people who've been subjected to like the San Juanico Bridge torture. So those kinds of contradictions are scattered throughout the film. You also heard about the island, right, guys? Yung pinaalis
Wait,
sila lahat from the island and then it became a zoo. So those kinds of contradictions coming from Imelda's mouth really remind me of the quote that one of the lady there said, "Why do we even let Imelda open her mouth at this point?" So, what do you think these glaring contradictions, as Danny and Manny have said, what do you think these contradictions reveal about our present reality, like outside the movie? How does this determine our perception of the Marcoses?
I think si Tita Lauren, her treatment of Imelda throughout this film was she was neither overly sympathetic nor overtly critical of the woman. Parang Greenfield, what do you call that? She provided a canvas where Imelda's grandeur and delusions were parang shown side by side. So we see that with the painful memories of those who suffered during the Marcos regime, such as parang about an hour in those interviews, as well as her ambitions and subsequent rise to power through her son Bongbong. So parang this duality, yung contrast between Imelda's perception of reality and what actually happened is what lies at the heart of the Kingmaker.
That's very true. The Kingmaker really shows us that there's this disturbing dissonance in the way that we view the Marcoses today and how they view themselves. That despite all the transgressions that they've made in history, the lack of remorse, the amount of billions of wealth that they still take advantage of today, the Filipinos are still surprisingly very tolerant. They're very forgiving, and worst of all, they're still blinded by the gilded legacy and beauty that is projected by the Marcos family. So much so that the Marcoses now are back in power. We have a Marcos in president who watches Grand Prix in Singapore. The film, it's a lot. It takes us to how much it makes the viewers confront this contradictory reality, both inside the film and outside the film, the world that exists before us, the Philippines, and a reality of history. So I guess that brings us to the second to the last question, right? As discussed by the art experts that we've learned throughout class, like Benjamin Walter and John Berger, there are many ways by which the meaning of art, or in this case, the movie, is obstructed or distorted by contemporary times, like mystification, the fact that movies and artworks are spread around the world for free. Do you think that Lauren Greenfield has taken into account these considerations, or has she fallen for the traps of contemporary art and obscured the real meaning of her own artwork through the Kingmaker? The Kingmaker. Sorry. I'll drink.
I feel that Lauren Greenfield, I don't think she obscures the film's meaning. I think she actually does a lot of deliberate steps to make it quite clear and to sort of demystify her own work, which talks about like the mystification of art, as we discussed in Artap, is about where the current art world, or a lot of part of the art world, is sort of shrouded in mystery, where people have a tendency to like make it so only authoritative figures like talk about art and explain art to other people. You remove it from a particular social political context. You oftentimes commodify it through like forces of capitalism, and we also mass produce it as well, so it becomes without substance to other people. So in the specific context of the Kingmaker, the legacy of the Marcoses, I think the art here is the way that historical narratives are shown and depicted to the people on the ground and what they have access to. So like this art, in a broader sense, is like the media about martial law and the Marcos regime that people have access to on social media and Facebook. the booklets and pamphlets that they have access to as well in school. Like there's a scene literally talking to like children, and then the children say, "Oh, the Marcos had the best, particular administration in their country. Like everything was good then, the golden age of the Marcos, etc." So this is the art that they're exposed to that Lauren Greenfield tries to illuminate as well. So there's a lot of intentional ways in which Lauren Greenfield showcases how like pro-administration historians, politicians, general society has framed historical narratives around like the Marcos regime in a particularly convenient way to the Marcoses. So yeah.
Anyone who wants to build on that, like what Jello said?
Thank you. I would siguro Greenfield through the documentary liberates historical narratives, like you said, from the mystification of the academe of books of parang just history books, and the mystification then of the elite who have made learning about the horrors of martial law and by extent history na rin seem like a chore or a classroom lecture from the most boring prof alive. Docu films like this, they bring issues to life and they bring these issues to light by giving us by making them more than a statistic. You get to hear the stories from the people who experience it firsthand. You get to see parang firsthand accounts with pictures, places, and people to best illustrate the ills of martial law. Yun, so through the Kingmaker, history is humanized. Again, we make them more than more than a statistic, more than a number, and we get, I guess, by extension, we get people to engage or interact and fight back against something like historical revisionism.
Really, yeah, that's so true. I think that's one of the great powers of art, to bring out those kinds of emotions and meanings from simple facts of life like history, right? Really, brings to mind one of our history professors before, Sir Ambeth himself, who was all about popular history, right? It was about making history more interesting. And I think Lauren Greenfield was right in that she's able to make history more interesting, more provocative by creating artworks like The Kingmaker. I guess one of those that transitions us to our final question to ponder on. Do you think that given the fact that Lauren Greenfield was so intent on just distributing this out to the world, regardless of the fact that this was an international level film, right? It was shown in the Sundance Film Festival, for crying out loud. Do you think that the fact that it's not just being distributed the fact that it's being distributed for free to the public, what do you think that says about the aura of the movie? Or is it lost? Does making it freely available risk everyone blurring its meaning, especially given the political climate of the country, where films like this can be seen as subversive? What do you think about that?
I feel like the Kingmaker and all it's talking about, like with stolen wealth, with the grandeur of the Marcos era, even though it really wasn't grand, it really embraces like its multiplicit nature, its multiplicit aura. Like the fact that it's so freely available is like it says a lot about the message of the film, that it should be something that's like widespread. It should be seen as something as like a cautionary tale. And I think that this aura or depiction of this film, it doesn't really limit itself to what it was during the film festival. I feel like it's more of grown and it's become something bigger than itself, because it really lies within the story of the people that were affected by this, and the story of the people, us as a Filipino people, who are still affected by this curse of the Marcos family. And for foreigners, it may just look like, oh, this is the politics of a certain country. But like I said, this is the very foundation of our being as a modern nation. So this film, definitely carries like some different kind of importance or some different aura for us as Filipinos.
That's very interesting. I think that when you think of this as a cautionary tale, it really brings to life the intentions of Lauren Greenfield. But also, there's a lot of things to say about making art and pieces of art like this, like the Kingmaker, accessible to the greater public. By making it free, you democratize it. You democratize access to it. Do you think that that's a bad thing or a good thing for art in general? And why do you think that in the specific case of the Kingmaker, this is a net good or somehow good for the interpretation of the movie? Being able to watch it online for free. Anyone can build off on that.
I think that when you talk about Zen about like it being more democratized, I think that Lauren Greenfield, herself understands the social value of her work, right? She understands how transformative it is and how necessary her documentary, like not only to the international community, but also to the Filipinos, where she showcases it for free, literally on YouTube, or goes to UP Diliman and shows it for free. I think she understands how valuable her counter narrative against like political revisionism is for enhancing the actual necessary discourse on like the Marcos regime and its good and bad flaws, and sort of Imelda Marcos as a person, as the or architect of this resurgence of the Marcoses. I think she understands that this access to this information and the art herself, the art that she made herself, is really uniquely valuable, and so she understands that to make it free is to make it impactful to a lot more people. So yeah.
Yeah, and also I think that the aura of the film really lies on the democratization of the documentary itself, like how it relates to like its contrast to the personality of the Marcoses throughout history. And again, I think Lauren Greenfield really shows her like deliberate intent to bring the story of the Marcoses closer to the Filipino people and to like humanize them and to demystify like the story of the Marcoses, so that Filipinos can take off like their rose-colored lenses and view them to be flawed and difficult individuals that they really are, instead of being seen like gods or like the saviors of the country's golden age.
Take off their rose-colored lenses. Truly a very powerful statement. And I think, unfortunately, though, we have that's all the time we have to. But so far, it's been a great discussion from you guys. I want to thank all of you for your time. Um, Again, a terrific discussion. The world of the Kingmaker truly isn't just about one woman or one family story, but it's about all of us, 5.7 million viewers, the viewers of art that is our history, our collective memory, and our reality. Sabi nga ni Imelda in the movie, perception is reality and the truth is not. But what Imelda and the Marcoses forgot is that, as our history will show, the reality is truth. A truth that may sometimes be bitter, sometimes sweet, but unchangeable and set in stone. In the spirit of tea time with Tito Zen, I invite everyone to sip only authentic tea. Reflect on the narratives of our history with vigilance and commitment to guard the truth at a time when it's greatly under attack. To our amazing millions of viewers, our dedicated Apple Music and Spotify subscribers, and every single one of you has been part of this amazing journey, thank you for being here with us on Tea Time with Tito Zen. We'll see you all in the next episode of this podcast. And remember, continue to challenge, to question, and to love art in all its forms. Goodbye and have a safe week, Ateneans.
Thank you guys. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.